This is a private park. Residents only. You need to leave. I live in Building 7. I have every right to be here. I've lived here 4 years and I've never seen you before. I'm calling the police. You mean you're calling because I'm black? I'm reporting trespassing. You don't belong here. Then you're about to report a federal prosecutor who specializes in civil rights violations. This won't end well for you. On a warm Saturday afternoon in June, Bradley Whitmore thought he was protecting his condominium complex from a trespasser. What he didn't know was that the black woman grilling burgers with her daughter had spent the last 12 years prosecuting people exactly like him for housing discrimination. The woman standing next to that smoking grill wasn't going to be intimidated by threats or 911 calls. She was someone who understood federal civil rights law better than most judges. She knew the Fair Housing Act penalties by heart. And in the next 47 minutes, she was going to systematically dismantle Bradley Whitmore's finances, his reputation, and his entire comfortable retirement. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Melissa Hartwell was not your average 36-year-old black woman. While most people her age were still figuring out work-life balance and paying off student loans, Melissa had already become one of the most feared federal prosecutors in the Northern District of California. She wasn't just good at her job. She was legendary. As an assistant United States attorney in the Civil Rights Division, Melissa had built a career that made discriminatory landlords, racist HOA board members, and housing violators wake up in cold sweats. She had a 91% conviction rate in civil rights cases, which was virtually unheard of. She had secured prison sentences totaling over 180 years for people who thought their bigotry was consequence-free. She had testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee on Housing Discrimination Reform. She had written legal briefs that were cited in Supreme Court decisions. Defense attorneys hated her. Property management companies feared her. Fair housing advocacy groups considered her a hero. Because when Melissa Hartwell opened an investigation, people didn't just lose lawsuits. They lost everything. But here's what made Melissa truly dangerous to people like Bradley Whitmore. She didn't just know civil rights law in theory. She had prosecuted 23 Fair Housing Act cases in the past 8 years. She knew exactly how housing discrimination worked in real life. The subtle patterns. The coded language. The plausible deniability that racists hide behind. She could spot discriminatory intent from a mile away. She knew the difference between legitimate concerns about property rules and racial harassment disguised as community standards. She specialized in one particular type of case that most prosecutors found too difficult to prove: racially motivated complaints and harassment in residential settings. It was a pattern used by certain residents who wanted to drive out people of color without explicitly stating their racism. They would file noise complaints that only targeted non-white residents. They would call police on black families having barbecues while ignoring white families doing identical activities. They would claim concern about property values or community standards, but the pattern always revealed the truth. Melissa had prosecuted 11 cases involving this exact behavior. She had a 100% conviction rate on those cases. People who weaponized 911 against their black neighbors faced federal consequences when Melissa Carter was prosecuting. And on that Saturday afternoon, Bradley Whitmore was about to learn exactly why. Melissa had graduated from Harvard Law School with honors. She had clerked for a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals judge who specialized in constitutional law. Then she had done something most young lawyers considered career suicide. She had turned down offers from major corporate law firms paying $200,000 a year to take a job at the United States Attorney's Office making $78,000. Why? Because Melissa didn't want to defend corporations in air-conditioned conference rooms. She wanted to prosecute criminals who destroyed lives with discrimination. Specifically, she wanted to prosecute people who used housing as a weapon against communities of color. She had personal reasons for choosing this path. Her father had been one of the Tuskegee Airmen, a decorated World War II pilot who came home to an America that wouldn't let him buy a house in certain neighborhoods because of his skin color. Melissa had grown up hearing stories about redlining, about sundown towns, about real estate agents who would show black families only certain properties, about the humiliation of being qualified, professional, accomplished, and still treated as unwelcome. Those stories had shaped her. They had driven her to law school. They had pushed her into the Civil Rights Division. And they had made her absolutely relentless when prosecuting housing discrimination cases. Melissa was a single mother. Her daughter Zoe was 7 years old, bright and curious, with her mother's sharp mind and her grandfather's determination. Melissa lived modestly despite her high-powered career. She drove a 6-year-old Honda Accord. She lived in a nice but not extravagant condominium. She saved aggressively for Zoe's college fund. She didn't care about luxury. She cared about justice. And that Saturday afternoon, justice was about to be served in the most devastating way possible to a man who thought calling the police on a black woman grilling burgers was acceptable behavior. That day, Melissa had picked up Zoe from soccer practice. It was 2:30 in the afternoon, sunny, 78 degrees, perfect weather for outdoor cooking. Melissa had decided to grill burgers for lunch. Simple, normal weekend activity. Mother and daughter spending time together. She had brought a portable speaker playing quiet music, 2 lawn chairs, a small cooler with drinks and condiments. Zoe had brought her soccer ball to practice on the grass nearby. Melissa was wearing casual weekend clothes. Faded jeans, a gray Stanford Law School t-shirt from an alumni event, white sneakers. Her natural hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked exactly like what she was. A professional woman enjoying a Saturday afternoon with her kid. Nothing suspicious. Nothing unusual. Nothing that should attract attention. But to Bradley Whitmore, watching from his 4th-floor balcony, Melissa's presence was a problem that needed to be solved. Bradley Whitmore was 58 years old. He had lived at Riverside Gardens condominiums for 4 years, occupying a 2-bedroom unit in Building 6 on the 4th floor. He was divorced. His 2 adult children, a son in Seattle and a daughter in Portland, barely spoke to him anymore. Family gatherings had become awkward, then infrequent, then non-existent. Bradley told himself it was because they were busy with their own lives, but the truth was more complicated and more painful. They had grown tired of his complaints, his rigid worldview, his inability to accept that the world was changing around him. Bradley had taken early retirement from his job as a middle manager at a regional insurance company. He'd been 54 when the company brought in new leadership. Younger executives. More diverse management teams. People who questioned his methods and didn't appreciate his old-school approach. There had been personality conflicts, as the exit paperwork diplomatically phrased it. Bradley received a decent early retirement package. Not generous but enough to live on if he was careful. He had a pension, some retirement savings totaling about $180,000, and the equity in his condo. He was comfortable. Solidly middle class. Not wealthy but not struggling either. Bradley considered himself a responsible resident. The kind of person who cared about maintaining community standards. He paid his HOA fees on time every month. $450 that covered park maintenance, building security, shared amenity upkeep. He attended HOA meetings occasionally, though he'd never been elected to the board despite running twice. He believed Riverside Gardens needed people like him. Vigilant residents who weren't afraid to speak up when things weren't right. Who noticed when rules were being violated. Who protected property values by ensuring everyone followed the standards. At least that's how Bradley saw himself. The HOA board had a different perspective. Bradley's file contained notes that painted a less flattering picture. Overly vigilant. Prone to reporting non-issues. Possible bias concerns. Handled diplomatically. In the past 3 years, Bradley had filed 14 formal complaints. 14. The HOA property manager had stopped taking his calls and now required him to submit everything in writing. But the pattern in those complaints told a story Bradley himself refused to acknowledge. He had complained about loud music from the Martinez family's quinceañera celebration. It was 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening. The music was at a reasonable volume. The party ended by 9 p.m. But Bradley had filed 3 separate noise complaints and demanded the HOA send a warning letter. He had reported the Kim family in Building 7 for suspicious cooking smells that permeated the hallway. The HOA had responded that cooking smells were not a violation of any policy and that diverse cuisine was part of living in a multicultural community. Bradley had not been satisfied with that answer. He had called the police on a black delivery driver, insisting the man was casing the building for a burglary. The driver had been delivering furniture to a white resident on the 3rd floor. The police had been annoyed. The resident had been mortified. The HOA had been furious. Bradley had been given his first formal warning. Stop filing discriminatory complaints or face mediation requirements. He had filed 11 more complaints after that warning. 10 of them involved non-white residents. 1 involved a white family, but only after they had hosted the Martinez family for a joint birthday party. The pattern was undeniable to everyone except Bradley himself. That Saturday afternoon, Bradley had been on his balcony. He liked to sit out there with his coffee watching the communal park area below. Monitoring activity. making mental notes of who was using the facilities and whether they were following the rules. At 2:40 p.m. he noticed a black woman and a young girl setting up at one of the barbecue grills. He didn't recognize them. Bradley prided himself on knowing the residents of Riverside Gardens, though in reality, he knew maybe 30 people out of the 400 units. Most of his knowledge was limited to the white residents in his building and the people who looked like they belonged. The black woman was arranging lawn chairs. The girl was kicking a soccer ball on the grass. They had a cooler. A portable speaker. The woman was lighting the charcoal grill. Bradley watched for 10 minutes. His mind was already constructing a narrative. She doesn't look like she lives here. Probably a guest overstaying her welcome. Maybe she's homeless and using the park for free amenities. Someone needs to check if she's actually a resident. The rules say residents only. I should make sure she belongs here. Do you think neighbors who racially profile residents should lose their homeownership rights? Drop your answer below. Bradley went inside and pulled out his HOA directory. He flipped through the pages looking for her face in the resident photos. He didn't find her, but that didn't mean anything. The directory was 2 years old. Some people opted out of including their photos. Bradley convinced himself this was suspicious. A real resident would have their photo in the directory. A real resident would look familiar. He went back to his balcony and watched for another 15 minutes. The woman was now flipping burgers on the grill. The girl was sitting in one of the lawn chairs drinking what looked like lemonade. Completely normal Saturday afternoon behavior. But Bradley's mental narrative had already decided this was wrong. At 3:05 p.m. Bradley made his decision. He walked across the park toward the grill. His approach was confident. Entitled, "The Walk of a Man Who Believed He Had Every Right to Question Someone's Presence." Melissa saw him coming. She had been a federal prosecutor long enough to recognize a certain type of person from 50 feet away. The body language, the facial expression, the purposeful stride of someone about to cause a problem. She kept her attention on the grill, flipping burgers, acting like she hadn't noticed him. "Excuse me," Bradley said, stopping about 6 feet from her grill. "This park is for residents only. Are you a guest of someone in the building?" Melissa looked up. She assessed him in 2 seconds. White man, late 50s, retired look about him, sense of ownership in his posture, tone that expected compliance. She'd dealt with 1,000 Bradley Whitmores in her career. "I live here," she said calmly. "Building 7, Unit 712. Bradley frowned. "I've lived here 4 years and I've never seen you before. Can you prove you're a resident?" Melissa felt the familiar exhaustion that came with this kind of encounter. The constant requirement to prove belonging. To justify existing in spaces she had every legal right to occupy. But she was also a federal prosecutor who knew exactly what was happening here and exactly what the law said about it. "I don't need to prove anything to you," she responded evenly. "I'm a resident using shared amenities on a Saturday afternoon." She turned back to her grill. Bradley didn't like being dismissed. He stepped closer. "I'm on the HOA Standards Committee. I have authority to verify residency." Melissa almost smiled. She had read the Riverside Gardens HOA bylaws cover to cover when she moved in 18 months ago. Professional habit. Know the rules so you know when someone's violating them. "No, you're not," she said without looking at him. "I've read the HOA bylaws. There is no standards committee. What you're doing right now is harassment." Bradley's face flushed red. His voice got louder. "I know everyone in this development. You don't belong here." Zoe stopped playing with her soccer ball. She walked over to her mother, concern visible on her 7-year-old face. "Mommy, why is that man yelling?" Melissa put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "It's okay, sweetie. This man is just confused about the rules. Go sit in the chair for a minute. Everything's fine." Zoe walked to the lawn chair, but she kept watching. Other people in the park were starting to notice the confrontation. An elderly white couple at an adjacent table, who had been there since 1 p.m., turned to observe. A young white woman jogging past slowed down, then stopped completely about 20 feet away. An Asian family using a grill 40 feet down the park pulled out their phone. Bradley was oblivious to the gathering audience. His focus was entirely on Melissa. "Fine," he said, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the police." Melissa turned to face him directly. She spoke clearly, making sure her voice would carry. "You're calling the police because I'm barbecuing while black. You understand that's what you're doing, right?" Bradley dialed 911. "This has nothing to do with race," he said, the classic deflection of someone whose actions were entirely about race. "You're trespassing and I'm reporting it." The call connected. 911, "What's your emergency?" A dispatcher's voice came through the phone. Bradley kept his eyes on Melissa as he spoke. I'm at Riverside Gardens Condominiums, 1847 Lakeside Drive in Oakland. There's a woman trespassing in our private park. Is she threatening anyone or causing a disturbance? The dispatcher asked. Bradley hesitated. She's using our barbecue facilities. She claims she's a resident, but I've never seen her before. Has she violated any posted rules, sir? She doesn't belong here. She needs to leave. Sir, is this woman doing anything illegal right now? She's trespassing. How many times do I need to say it? I'll send a unit to verify, but sir, if she's a paying resident, then she has a right to use shared amenities. Just send someone. No. Bradley ended the call. He looked at Melissa with an expression of smug satisfaction. Police are on their way. We'll see if you really live here. Sandra Chin had just opened the door from Building 7 when she heard the confrontation. Sandra was 44, an architect who had lived at Riverside Gardens for 3 years. She recognized both people immediately. Bradley, the serial complainer who made everyone uncomfortable. And Melissa, her neighbor from the 7th floor who was always friendly in the elevator, who had helped her carry groceries once, whose daughter sometimes played with the kids in the park. Bradley. Sandra called out, walking quickly toward them. That's Melissa from 712. She's lived here over a year. Bradley turned to her. Stay out of this, Sandra. I'm handling a trespassing situation. You're harassing a resident, Sandra said, her voice rising. Again. This is the same thing you did to the Martinez family. Sandra pulled out her phone and started recording video. The young woman who had stopped jogging did the same. The Asian family already had their camera pointed at the scene. Bradley was now being documented from 3 different angles by 3 different witnesses. He didn't seem to care or didn't notice. He turned back to Melissa. The police are coming because I'm barbecuing while black, Melissa repeated, louder this time. You understand you just weaponized 911 against a black woman who's done nothing wrong. This has nothing to do with race, Bradley insisted. You're playing the race card. I would have called on anyone I don't recognize. That's a lie, Bradley, Sandra interjected. White guests use these grills every weekend. You've never said a word to them. You've never asked them to prove residency. The elderly white couple at the nearby table spoke up. The husband stood. We've been sitting here since 1 o'clock. We watched this whole thing. This woman hasn't bothered anyone. She's been grilling burgers with her daughter. You walked over and started interrogating her. Bradley's face was now bright red. He pointed at the couple. You don't know what you're talking about. The wife pulled out her phone. Actually, we do. And we're witnesses. She started recording as well. 4 cameras were now documenting Bradley Whitmore's discriminatory harassment of a federal prosecutor. Evidence that would later prove absolutely devastating in multiple legal proceedings. At 3:15 p.m., 2 Oakland Police Department vehicles pulled into the Riverside Gardens parking lot. 4 officers emerged. Officer James Rivera, Latino, 8 years on the force, and Officer Sarah Mitchell, black, 12 years of experience, approached the park area. They could see immediately what kind of call this was. A residential dispute. Probably neighbor conflict. Possibly nothing. They walked toward the group of people gathered around the barbecue area. The officers separated Bradley and Melissa. Standard procedure for any dispute call. Officer Mitchell approached Melissa. Officer Rivera took Bradley aside. Ma'am, Officer Mitchell said professionally, we received a call about trespassing. Do you live here? Yes, Melissa responded calmly. Building 7, Unit 712. I've lived here 18 months. Can I see identification and proof of residency? Of course. Melissa reached into her small crossbody bag. She pulled out her driver's license and handed it to Officer Mitchell. The address on the license matched. Melissa then pulled out her key fob with the unit number engraved on it. She showed the officer her phone screen with a recent HOA fee payment receipt. Then she pulled up her lease agreement, also saved on her phone. Officer Mitchell reviewed everything. It all checked out immediately. You're an attorney? Officer Mitchell asked, noticing the Stanford Law School shirt. Federal prosecutor, Melissa said. Civil Rights Division, Northern District of California. I specialize in Fair Housing Act violations. Officer Mitchell's expression shifted subtly. The kind of shift that happens when a police officer realizes a situation is not what the caller claimed. This gentleman called 911 because? Because I'm black and he assumed I don't belong here, Melissa said clearly. Meanwhile, Officer Rivera was getting a very different story from Bradley. Sir, why did you call 911? She was trespassing, Bradley insisted. What specific suspicious behavior did you observe? I didn't recognize her. So you called police because you didn't recognize a resident in a 400-unit complex? Officer Rivera's tone was becoming less patient. She doesn't look like she belongs here. Officer Rivera wrote something in his notepad. Sir, what does someone who belongs here look like? Bradley realized he was cornered. He stammered. I was protecting the community. The officers reconvened in the center of the park. They compared notes for about 30 seconds, then approached Bradley together. Sir, Officer Mitchell began, her tone professional but firm, the woman you called about is a verified resident. She has a valid lease, current identification, HOA payment receipts, and a key fob to her unit. She's using shared amenities on a weekend afternoon. She hasn't violated any rules, any laws, or any community standards. What exactly did you expect us to do here? Bradley opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I was just making sure she belonged here. You called 911, Officer Rivera said, for a non-emergency based on what exactly? Your statement to me was that she doesn't look like she belongs here. Can you explain what you meant by that? Bradley's face went pale. He understood suddenly that his words had been documented. That wasn't what I meant. Then what did you mean, sir? Bradley had no answer. Officer Mitchell stepped closer. Sir, we need to talk about appropriate use of emergency services. Filing false police reports is a misdemeanor in California. Racially motivated harassment is a civil rights violation. And this woman you called on? She's a federal prosecutor who specializes in exactly these kinds of cases. I strongly suggest you walk away right now and consult an attorney. Sandra Chin spoke up. Officers, I've lived here 3 years. Bradley has a pattern of calling police on non-white residents. The HOA has his complaint history documented. It's all people of color. The elderly white couple approached. We'd like to give a statement, the husband said. We watched the entire interaction. This woman was peaceful. He was the aggressor. The Asian family walked over with their phone. We recorded the whole thing on video. Would you like us to send it to you? Officer Mitchell nodded. Yes, please. We'll need all witness statements for the incident report. She turned to Melissa. Ma'am, would you like this incident documented in an official report? Absolutely, Melissa said. I'll need the incident report number and the 911 call recording. Both are public records in California, correct? Officer Mitchell almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. You'll have everything you need. She looked at Bradley. Sir, you're receiving a verbal warning for misuse of emergency services. If you continue to file false reports, you'll face criminal charges. Do you understand? Bradley nodded, humiliated, aware that everyone in the park was staring at him. The officers took statements from all the witnesses. They documented the incident thoroughly. They provided Melissa with a report number. Then they left. Bradley walked back to his building without another word. Melissa finished grilling burgers. She and Zoe ate lunch in the park, exactly as they'd planned. But Melissa's legal mind was already working, already planning, already building the case that would destroy Bradley Whitmore's comfortable retirement. That evening, after Zoe went to bed, Melissa opened her laptop. She created a comprehensive documentation file. Timeline of events with exact timestamps. Photos of the barbecue setup, the park signage, her HOA documents showing she was a resident in good standing. Screenshots of the HOA bylaws showing there was no standards committee, proving Bradley had lied. List of all witnesses with contact information. She submitted a public records request for the 911 call recording. She requested the police incident report with all witness statements attached. She spent 3 hours building an airtight evidentiary foundation. On Monday morning, Melissa filed formal complaints with 3 separate agencies. She filed with HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which enforces the Fair Housing Act at the federal level. She filed with the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing, the state agency handling discrimination complaints. And she sent a detailed letter to the Riverside Gardens HOA board, complete with evidence, witness statements, and a not-so-subtle reminder that the HOA could be held liable for not addressing a resident with a documented pattern of racial harassment. She also requested Bradley's complete complaint history from the HOA, and she made it clear that if they refused, she would subpoena those records in federal court. The HOA attorney received Melissa's letter on Tuesday morning. He read it twice, felt his stomach drop, and immediately called an emergency board meeting. The HOA board met Wednesday evening. 7 board members, the property manager, and the HOA attorney crowded into a conference room. The attorney laid out the situation in blunt terms. This is a textbook Fair Housing Act violation. The complainant is a federal prosecutor who specializes in civil rights law. She knows exactly what she's doing. Bradley Whitmore's complaint file shows a clear pattern of targeting non-white residents. We have 14 complaints over 3 years, 13 against people of color. We have 4 witnesses who recorded the incident on video. We have a 911 call where he says this woman doesn't look like she belongs. We are legally liable if we don't take immediate action. The board reviewed Bradley's file. They watched portions of the cell phone videos the witnesses had provided. They listened to the 911 recording. The evidence was damning. One board member asked the question everyone was thinking. How much trouble are we in? The attorney's response was sobering. If we act decisively now, we might avoid being named in her lawsuit. If we do nothing, we're co-defendants in a federal civil rights case. The board voted unanimously. They sent Bradley a cease and desist letter that day. They required him to attend mandatory mediation within 30 days. They put him on formal notice that any further discriminatory incidents would result in immediate lease termination proceedings. They also implemented new policies. Mandatory anti-discrimination training for all residents. A clear complaint procedure that prohibited racial profiling. A 3-strikes policy for discriminatory harassment. Bradley received the letter Thursday afternoon. He panicked. He called an attorney Friday morning. The consultation cost him $5,000 up front. The attorney reviewed all the evidence Melissa had compiled, the 911 recording, the witness videos, Bradley's complaint history showing the racial pattern, the police incident report. Then the attorney gave Bradley the worst news of his life. Mr. Whitmore, you called 911 on a federal prosecutor for barbecuing while black. Everything is recorded. 4 witnesses have video evidence. Your complaint history shows a clear discriminatory pattern. You have no defense. None. The attorney recommended immediate settlement negotiations to avoid going to trial. But settlement was just the beginning of Bradley's problems. 6 weeks later, HUD assigned an investigator to Melissa's complaint. The investigator was thorough. She interviewed Melissa, Bradley, and all 4 witnesses. She reviewed the 911 recordings and police reports. She subpoenaed Bradley's complete HOA complaint history. And she found exactly what Melissa knew she would find. A pattern. 14 complaints over 3 years. 13 targeted at non-white residents. 1 targeted at a white family only after they socialized with a Latino family. The pattern proved discriminatory intent beyond any reasonable doubt. The HUD findings came back 8 weeks after the investigation began. Violation of the Fair Housing Act, specifically 42 United States Code Section 3604. Racial harassment creating a hostile housing environment. Pattern of discriminatory conduct targeting residents based on race. The HUD penalties hit Bradley immediately. $16,000 in civil penalties. Mandatory completion of 120 hours of fair housing education. 3 years of federal monitoring. Any subsequent violations would carry penalties of $65,000. But those federal penalties were just the beginning. Melissa filed a civil lawsuit in federal court. The claims were extensive. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Violation of the California Fair Employment and Housing Act. Harassment based on race in a residential setting. Bradley's attorney reviewed the evidence one final time. The 911 call recording where Bradley said Melissa didn't look like she belonged. The 4 witness videos. The police incident report. The HUD investigation findings. His conclusion was devastating. We have no defense. We need to settle immediately. Settlement negotiations began in October. Melissa's demands were non-negotiable. $45,000 in damages, donated entirely to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Bradley was required to sell his condominium and move out within 90 days. He was required to issue a public written apology in the HOA newsletter. And Bradley was required to pay all of the HOA's legal fees, $22,000. Bradley accepted. He had no choice. The financial devastation was comprehensive. HUD penalty $16,000. Settlement to Melissa $45,000. His attorney fees $18,000. HOA legal fees $22,000. Moving costs and forced sale losses $15,000. Total cost $116,000. Bradley's retirement savings had been $180,000. He lost 64% because he couldn't imagine a black woman belonged in his park. He moved to a 1-bedroom apartment in Antioch, California, 40 miles away. His adult children stopped speaking to him after seeing the news coverage. His name appeared in the HUD violator database. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Bradley gave one interview claiming he was protecting property values. The interviewer asked, protecting property values from a federal prosecutor grilling burgers? Bradley had no answer. Should racially motivated 911 calls carry mandatory criminal charges? Comment below. And if you think these stories need to be told, hit that subscribe button. This wasn't about one barbecue. This was about Bradley weaponizing 911 against a black woman existing in a space his racism said she didn't belong. He lost everything because he called police on a mother grilling burgers. The question isn't whether Melissa deserved to be there. The evidence proves she did. The question is, what does it take for people like Bradley to see black people as neighbors, not threats, as human beings with equal rights to enjoy shared spaces?